Alright, in this video I want to cover everything we know so far about the upcoming Souls-like action RPG, The Lords of the Fallen. New announced mechanics, new locations, new bosses, character creation even. Check out the chapters for more precise seeking. From Software is almost certainly waiting until next year to release its Elden Ring DLC, Shadow of the Nerd Tree. We have The Lords of the Fallen coming out on the 13th of October this year, and the more information we get about the game, the more people seem to be falling for it. And since a lot of YouTubers got a chance to hand-on playtest the game, we have some ground to cover today. This is everything you need to know about The Lords of the Fallen 2023. So just like the best girl Karlach once said,
let's make tracks.
Shall we? I'd like to thank you all for helping me reach that first 1K. It means a lot. My next goal is to reach 2K, so if you want to support me, subscribe to my channel. It goes a long way and helps me out heaps. Cheers. Those who have already watched my other Lords of the Fallen videos probably know how cautiously optimistic, or rather positively skeptical I am about the game. Well, now that we have way more information on the Lords of the Fallen, I can safely say that I'm still positively skeptical. But I promise, in this video I'll do my best to keep nitpicking to a minimum. Except for, of course, the sound design, because the sound design in the demo build at least is a big soft brick of doo-doo, quite literally. This new gameplay video starts with you being awakened in a new location, Defiled Sepulchre, by the man we've seen multiple times already in the previous videos. This is where you are being given the lantern, an item that comes with a bunch of really cool and interesting mechanics. The man in a majestic hat then tells you to seek them in the bowels and leaves.
Seek me in the bowels.
This time it looks more like real gameplay footage with HUD and everything. We can even see tutorial messages that teach us the basics of the game. And although most of them are pretty obvious, even for a casual gamer, some of the pop-ups shed light on Lords of the Fallen unique mechanics. Let's take a closer look then. We already know that Lords of the Fallen features two worlds, of the living, Axiom, and of the dead, Umbral, and that you can seamlessly travel between said worlds. As a matter of fact, you kinda have to travel between them at times. Here we can see that an Umbral entity prevents our progress. This is where you have to either use your lamp to peek into the world of the dead or entirely traverse to Umbral to remove the entity that roadblocks you. There are also Umbral parasites that make enemies in the world of the living stronger, so seeking and destroying the parasites in Umbral beforehand will make it so much easier for you in Axiom. It's really cool that all points of interest in Umbral are indicated by these little moth swarms. Another new mechanic that was introduced is Dread. The more time you spend in Umbral, the more dangerous it becomes. All the enemies become more aware of your presence and are likely to attack you sooner. I mean, it sounds pretty cool and makes Umbral a high risk, high reward sort of place, but I can see that it could be a bum out for some players who don't like being pressured by an invisible timer and just like to explore at their own pace. And another thing, health withering. When entering Umbral or performing certain actions with your lamp, your health receives wither. Looky here, a portion of your health becomes grayed out, and to recover it you need to attack enemies. However, you lose it instantly if you're hit. We've already seen this mechanic in Bloodborne and some other games too, Liza P for example. I say if done right, it's a great complement to fast-paced combat, where you have to decide either to be as aggressive as possible to restore your health back, or to play it safe using a ranged weapon or something. Blocking also withers your health instead of depleting your stamina, as well as parrying. Parrying damages enemies' posture. Every enemy has their own posture meter, and once it's broken, you can perform a riposte attack called Grievous Strike. From what I've heard, almost every boss can be parried, but since most of them have high posture, you'll have to parry them multiple times before being able to perform a Grievous Strike. Soulflay. This ability lets you extract the souls of the enemies to either deal massive damage to them or to shove them off the cliff. That requires Soulflay charges that can be recovered by siphoning these disgusting blisters. You can also use Soulflay to manipulate the environment, and it is confirmed that environment manipulation with Soulflay doesn't require a charge, which is a shame in my opinion. It'd be cool if you had to micromanage the charges and choose where to use them. I'd also like to mention again that there will be an option to play the game with friends in a seamless fashion. As in, you could play the whole thing from start to finish together with your mate. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any information about how loot will be distributed among the party members, and I don't know if there will be a cross-platform option, but the only thing I know is that the game only allows a team of two. We can also now take a closer look at the inventory. Nothing out of ordinary. Well, you're looking at it right now. Looks very soulsy. On the top right corner we can see the amount of souls in possession and a souls modifier, a mechanic that found its way to the game from the original 2014 lords. The more enemies you kill without resting at a bonfire, the higher your modifier grows, giving you more souls for killing enemies but also making it more risky for you. And speaking of bonfires, in the Lords of the Fallen they're called vestiges. They are used as spawn points, and here we can see that you also can warp between already discovered vestiges, level up, and invite your wife to play with you. Good stuff. On top of that, there are these patches of flower where you can spawn additional vestiges for your own convenience, but as we already know, that comes at a significant cost. We have two new bosses featured in the video, Holy Bulwark Otto and the Light Reaper. And where Otto dies to one visceral, the Light Reaper is quite interesting. Mostly because you can see here that after dying and traversing to the world of the dead, he's no longer riding a beast. As we know, some of the bosses have different attack patterns and different moves depending on the world we're fighting them in. With the Light Reaper we can also see that in Umbral it pretty much turns into a completely different boss fight. I only wish that dying to a flying version of the Light Reaper is not scripted. Character creation. I really hope that we will get more information and the visuals of the character creation before the release. Well, we know that we will be able to create and customize our own characters, choose a body type, etc. and pick one of the 10 classes, but that's about it for now. And since there's nothing much to say about character creation, let's do a breakdown of Lords of the Fallen starting classes. I'll leave a source link in the description if you want to read the full thing. And we start with Blackfeather Ranger. Blackfeather Ranger is a ranged archetype with two types of arrows at their disposal. Blackfeather's best strategy is to begin combat from afar, aiming manually and landing headshots for critical damage. If the ranger does get into a close-ranged scrap, once the enemy disengages they can let loose with specialized arrows to trigger debuffs or elemental damage before getting back in and finishing them off with an axe. Blackfeather Ranger starts with an axe, a bow, oak arrows, poison arrows, light shield, and medium armor. And here's a note from the developer. Picking up targets from afar on the move, landing headshots in this type of melee focused game will always be satisfying, especially landing critical bow hits on the bosses, hitting their weak spots which are otherwise unreachable most of the time by melee. And next up we have Condemned, a masochistic character class choice for pain gluttons. The Condemned is a wretched prisoner who has suffered indescribable torment. Flimsy and feeble, they make for a very poor starting class. They use their waste buckets from the cells as melee weapons. They can throw rocks at their enemies, but they won't achieve much except annoyance. As pitiful as that sounds, if they are fast on their feet, they can make reasonable progress. I can easily see myself doing my first playthrough as Condemned. Their starting gear is a broken bucket fist weapon, throwable rocks, and light armor. No question, they have one of the most iconic looks, no shit, and they are perfect for experts that are keen on optimizing their builds. If the idea of starting with quote-unquote worst class and thriving with it for bragging rights sounds appealing, then the Condemned is the class for you. But the number one reason to play this class is the two-handed sprint heavy attack, the dive kick. Dive kicking people off ledges puts the fall in the Lords of the Fallen. Who wrote this? The Exiled Stalker. The Exiled Stalker is an advanced class that fits the mold of the cunning and stylish rogue. This class wields twin daggers and is best described as Dervish of Death. Getting in, chaining hits, and then disengaging in a flash only to re-engage half a second later is their specialty. They can also poison their weapons. This is an advanced class, it requires a lot of precision in execution and mastery of the terrain. As such, it is not recommended for beginners. They start with twin daggers, medium stalker armor, throwable daggers, and poisoned salts. Here's a note from the dev. The medieval assassin cutthroat trope is obviously incredibly important. The Stalker is a stylish daredevil that appeals to many since it is the epitome of confidence and martial artistry. A deadly dervish of death with poisoned blades. That being said, this is a very demanding class and its lengthy combos can land the players in hot water quite often. Hallowed Knight. The Hallowed Knight is a classic sword and board archetype, very versatile with a fast attack rate, while also having fairly good armor. Despite how heavy the armor looks, this class is medium encumbered, allowing for decent dashes and rolls. Also, Hallowed Knight is open to spellcasting from the onset. The starting gear is a short sword, knight shield, heavy armor, grenades, and a healing over time consumable. This is an all-rounded jack of all trades. Great defenses, fast attacks, popular weapons. Tossing grenades is always good fun. Next up we have Mornstead Poor Fucking Infantry. Extremely long melee range with an emphasis on defense, ranged javelin tossing, and being quick on their feet. Despite this class starting off with comparatively low damage, their ranged capabilities more than make up for those shortcomings. Two-handing a spear opens up massive lunging thrusts and multiple fast pokes. Starting gear is a spear, obviously, light shield, heavy armor, throwable javelins, and a healing over time consumable. This class is the infantry soldier archetype. Spear on the shoulder, small shield poking at enemies from afar. The common type of medieval warrior that conquered the lands, poking at its enemies with a spear and javelin. The common rank-and-file soldier rising above its status is another juicy medieval trope. Orient Preacher. The pious evangelist of the Orient Church. This is meant to be an advanced class for experienced players. While lacking in physical protection by donning robes and a flimsy shield, the preacher more than makes for that with a tremendous hat. The hammer is weighty and impactful, breaking the will and posture of the heretics, and the starting healing spells grant the preacher unparalleled sustain. Starting gear, a hammer, light shield radiant catalyst, healing radiant spell, light armor, and a small mana stone consumable. Given how religion permeates all aspects of the game, the preacher feels like the most lore-appropriate class, bringing justice to the heretics, redeeming the sentinels, and smiting the demonic back from whence they came. And then there's this majestic hat that they sport. Partisan. A variant of the Hallowed Knight, the Partisan is a Mornstead Knight champion. His starting weapon, a flail, is more specialized and comes along with a crossbow, which gives him quite powerful single-target ranged options, especially compared to the Knight's bomb that focuses more on area of effect damage. The Partisan style of play is meant to be very relentless in their attack, especially given their unripe berries that buff stamina regeneration. They start with a flail, a knight shield, crossbow, heavy armor, and unripe berries for stamina regen. Clad in chainmail, swinging flails and shooting crossbows, the Partisan is the skirmisher archetype. Perfectly balanced with armor that is not as heavy as the Hallowed Knights, it reflects the fantasy of an effective duelist for all situations. Pirate Cultist. The Pirate Cultist is an advanced class and a worshipper of a deer that has sworn to see the natural order and humanity's one true god finally restored. A mage wielding pyromancy spells that engages enemies from afar with a very effective fire projectile. They also make good use of heavy pole arm at their disposal for when things survive the fiery barrage and close in. The staff is particularly effective against groups of enemies, while his initial fire magic is strong against single targets or close group targets. This may seem exceptionally strong, but take heed. The early area features Rogar enemies, and fire spells are not particularly effective against them. Starting gear is Cultist Staff, Polearm, Rogar Catalyst, Infernal Orb spell, medium armor, and a small mana stone consumable. And a note from the devs. With their masks made from human skin, these pyromancers are anti-preachers, so to speak. Human cultists yearning for a deer's return, spreading its pestilent teachings in the human communities, and immolating the opposition. Aside from being agents of chaos and destruction, they also revel in bloodletting, collecting hands and using them as catalysts. This is a very Lords of the Fallen kind of class, since embracing the unfettered power that the Rogar wields is very satisfying and damning. Next up we have Udiranger Warwolf, all-out offensive class that focuses on overpowering melee strikes that can stagger foes while still being fast on their feet. Right from the outset, this class has the ability to set their weapon on fire using fire salts and swing it around like a maniac. The Warwolf starts with a long sword, throwable axes, medium armor, and fire salts. The Warwolf is the barbarian archetype, fur-clad berserker, no shield, all-in, devastating wide sweeping attacks, and really handy axes to throw. This class fulfills that melee glass cannon fantasy. With a little bit of a Radiance or Infernal, you can learn buffing Warcries to further deepen the fantasy. And finally, we have a Dark Crusader, the premium boy. A powerful melee class with radiant powers and a long sword capable of massive sweeps and deadly vertical strikes. The Dark Crusader is indomitable in melee, even more so than the Hallowed Knight. While it lacks in the range department, it more than makes up for it with excellent physical protection. The Crusader can charge into enemies wielding the sword in two-handed stance, performing devastating spins, and few can withstand the onslaught, especially early game. Starting gear: Crusader Greatsword, Crusader Heavy Armor, and a Rosary Catalyst. The Crusader is a poster boy, looks absolutely metal, and is by far the most lore-appropriate character to crusade and right the wrongs in Mornstead. Of course he is, he's a premium character. He makes the game $10 more expensive. Look, I'm really excited to play the Lords of the Fallen. Here's hoping that after letting a group of YouTubers play the demo build, they will polish it a bit further and finally let us all play a little demo or something. I still think it's safer to wait for a week or two after the release before buying it. But the Lords of the Fallen looks incredibly promising, if you ignore the terrible sound design that should be completely redone in my opinion. But hey, I could probably turn a blind eye on the sound design if the rest of the game is good. And what about you? What do you think about Lords of the Fallen? What starting class looks the most appealing to you? Once the game is out, I'm starting as a Condemned, that's for sure. We'll stream it too here on YouTube, so stop by, let's suffer together. Thanks for watching, see ya.